Hi, I'm Luke. I'm a bike gearhead, and today we're going to be talking about a really critical part of your bike, which is the rear derailleur, this little piece right here. It's going to be responsible for all of the shifting on your bike these days. Some bikes still use double chainring setups in the front. So you have, two chain rings, you have a front derailleur, but for the purposes of today's video, we're going to be talking about the rear derailleur, what it does, how it can be knocked out of alignment, and then the last step is we're actually going to go through aligning the rear derailleur and readjusting it. The rear derailleur is named because basically what it does is it derails the chain from one cog to the next. So when you shift and when you push the shift button up on your shifter, it tells the derailleur either via a mechanical, just steel cable, or through a electronic signal, whether that's wired or wireless. It tells the rear derailleur to move the chain one cog. How it does that is basically in a cabled setup, in a mechanical setup, it will either apply or release tension on the cable to get that chain to move. In an electronic setup, there is basically a set distance that the servo motor and the rear derailleur will move, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. We do have the electronic setups as well, but for now we're focusing on a mechanical setup because even though electronic setups have become a lot more common these days, mechanical setups are still what you're going to be seeing the most of, so we want to make sure that we cover that. What a derailleur does is it just moves the chain. So it has effectively 4 main adjustments to it. It's going to have your upper limit, which is how far the derailleur moves away from the center of the bike towards your smallest cog. It has a lower limit, which is how far the derailleur moves inwards towards your spokes. It has a B tension adjustment, which is going to determine how far away the upper jockey wheel sits from your cassette. And then it's going to have a cable tension adjustment, which depending on the system is going to be adjusted here via a barrel adjuster. Mountain bikes will have them up at the shifter, but we'll kind of go over that as we get into it. Symptoms of a derailleur needing adjustment are basically any sort of clicking, not consistent shifting. This one has kind of purposely been put out of adjustment so we can show what that looks like. But basically, as you pedal the bike, you hear some noise when you're in a cog. When you go to hit the shift, you can hear it doesn't really want to shift. Sometimes if you click the shift button once, you'll get 2 shifts. You can hear, pretty much anyone would agree, this doesn't sound like a properly adjusted rear derailleur. So if you hear this when you're out riding, whether it's on the road, on the mountain, it probably needs an adjustment. Why do derailleurs go out of adjustment? The nice thing about electronic setups is they really don't unless something is bent via an impact. Cable systems can go out of adjustment if the system is kind of fouled up by grit, dirt, etc. So if you're riding a lot in inclement weather, kind of dirt can get in between the cable and the cable housing, which is this black piece here. It can also get out of adjustment if you've just replaced your cable and housing and everything kind of settles in and it beds into place, and that's going to release tension on the cable, which is going to throw everything out of whack. If you have all of a sudden your derailleur goes out of adjustment, means your derailleur hanger, which is this separate little piece right here, has been bent. We're going to go over that in a completely separate video. See the link down below for that one. Basically, if that hanger is bent, the cage of the derailleur will not be parallel with the cogs, and it's just going to throw everything off. So the best way to check for that is visually, if you all of a sudden you're out on a ride, you hit something, you smack into something, or you start your ride, because this has happened where your bike's in a garage or whatever, roommate, significant other, kid, somebody knocks the bike over and doesn't tell you, or you knock it over and don't remember, and it lands on the derailleur side, it can bend that hanger. So if you get out to start a ride and all of a sudden your shifting's off, or you're out on a ride and you hear a stick hit your rear wheel and then your shifting's off, you want to come to the back of your bike and just visually look at the rear derailleur cage. If it's not perfectly parallel with the cogs, your derailleur hanger is probably bent. You can also just visually look at the rear derailleur hanger itself. If it's bent inwards, if it's bent outwards, it wants to be perfectly parallel with those cogs. So if it's anything other than that, probably means it needs to be aligned. So we'll cover that in that separate video. One thing to point out here, though, with the parallel derailleur cage is there are some modern systems, Shimano 12-speed mountain, SRAM transmission, where the lower pulley wheel, so this one down here, is intentionally off-center and off-parallel to make the chain line more consistent as you're shifting through the gears. So in those systems, you want to look specifically at the upper pulley wheel and how that's aligned with the cogs in the rear derailleur. If you take a look at your derailleur hanger and you notice that it's bent for whatever reason, take a look at that video that we linked earlier and straighten that, whether it's by yourself or if you want to take it to a bike shop to have it straightened, before you proceed further with the derailleur adjustment. Because if you try to adjust your derailleur with a misaligned hanger, it's just going to throw everything off. You want to make sure that you're starting from a good clean base point before you go through a rear derailleur adjustment. We know that this rear derailleur is out of adjustment. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the entire process of setting up and adjusting a rear derailleur. If you have something where it's just a cable tension issue, you could skip to the cable tension part of the adjustment. If you have a limit issue, you could skip to that part. But we're just going to walk through this step by step as if you're setting this up basically on a brand new bike. So what we're going to do is you want to shift your derailleur all the way down to the smallest cog. And you can see in this case, it doesn't want to get down into that smallest cog. So what we're going to do after we shift it down into the smallest cog is we're going to release the cable tension fully. So you want that to be totally, totally slack. So right now, we basically have a static rear derailleur that has no cable tension on it. And from that point, what you want to do is you want to set the high limit, which is how far the derailleur travels in this direction. On all mechanical derailleurs with a cable, this is going to be a physical stop. So there's going to be a little screw in here that you're going to want to adjust. On the electronic stuff, they still have physical stops except for SRAM transmission. We'll get to that later. But you want to grab the appropriate tool. It's going to be, there's a bunch of different tools that are used for this. Some have Phillips screws, some have small Allen keys. This particular one is a 2mm Allen key. So we'll go ahead and grab that. And you want to adjust your high limit per the manufacturer's instructions. Most of them are just so the upper pulley wheel is perfectly parallel and in line with the smallest cog. So we'll adjust that so that that jockey wheel perfectly lines up with the smaller cog. Now what we're doing here is we're establishing a baseline. So we're basically setting the derailleur at its base point so that every time we make a shift, it's moving the same distance and it's able to set into the gears appropriately. So now what we're going to do is reapply that cable tension. When you're redoing cable tension, you always want to take your barrel adjuster and bring it all the way back in, bottomed out, because 9 times out of 10, when you pull tension with your fingers on cable, it's not going to be enough. So you're going to have to add a little bit more. So what we'll do is we'll just pull tension on the cable. We'll tighten down that pinch bolt. Now you just need to do this enough so that the pinch bolt holds onto the cable. Go ahead and do that. So now once we have cable tension, we're going to start shifting through the gears. Now you can see there, didn't really move. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply cable tension. And you can hear the derailleur starting to try to get that chain up into the next cog. And you can see it's moved that chain up into the next cog. So we're going to leave it at there for tension. And we're just going to shift up. You can hear it's slotting into the gears pretty nicely without a ton of noise once it's in the gear. We're just going to keep going up all the way. until we get to this point. And you may encounter this. And what you'll encounter is you hear this kind of rubbing and grinding noise. And if you look down at your rear derailleur, you can see that the upper jockey wheel is actually contacting the teeth of that largest cog there. So what we need to do is adjust our B tension. That's going to be this screw right here on the Campy Ecker. So we'll go ahead, give that a turn to get that B tension away, get the jockey wheel away from the cog, and we'll try to shift up again. And you can see now it's coming into that cog nicely. So once you get up into this cog, you want to make sure that you're setting your low limit appropriately. This one is a little bit more critical than the high limit. If it derails off the high limit, it's still not great because it can, the chain can kind of get jammed in between your cog and the inside of your frame, which is never good. But what can happen here is if you overshift, the chain will get stuck in between the last cog and the spokes. You can damage spokes, you can break spokes, you can even, your derailleur cage can snag the spokes and you can rip your derailleur off. So you really want to make sure this one's properly aligned. So what you're going to do is when you get up into this cog, you want to physically take the derailleur and push it and make sure that you're all the way up against that limit. If you're not, back that limit out, a quarter turn at a time, eighth of a turn at a time. If you can't shift into this cog, it means your limit is too tight. If you're shifting past this cog and it looks like your derailleur is going to shift the chain off, you want to tighten this limit. Another thing to note about this is a lot of times if you have issues where all of, you can't, your bike isn't shifting into the last cog, but you haven't changed anything, like you just got your cable and housing replaced like 2 rides ago, now all of a sudden it's not shifting to that last cog, it's not a limit issue. What's happening is the rear derailleur doesn't have enough cable tension to get that chain up into the biggest cog. It doesn't matter if you adjust the limit. The limit is just a mechanical stop to prevent the derailleur from going too far in this direction or that direction. You need to make sure that your cable tension is set appropriately. So once you get those limits set up appropriately and you get your B tension adjusted like we just showed you, all you're going to do is shift the bike up and down through the gears. And make sure it's nice and clean. If you need to make minor adjustments, you can just go ahead and do that with your barrel adjuster. You literally, you make an eighth of a turn and it's going to make a difference in how that chain is grabbing the next cog. So you just go ahead, fine tune that. See, there's a little hesitation there. If your chain is having trouble climbing the cassette, going up into the bigger cogs, it means you need to add tension, which means you're turning the barrel adjuster out. If it's having trouble coming back down the cassette, you need to release tension, which means turning the barrel adjuster in or towards the bottom and bottoming it out. You can see that's snapping into the gears really nicely. No noise on the cogs. So we know we've got a well-adjusted rear derailleur. The last thing I like to do, just to be doubly sure, is I always like to check, make sure this bolt is nice and tight that attaches the derailleur to the hanger. And then I'll just double check and make sure I put a good amount of tension to hold that cable in place. That's it for mechanical adjustment of a mechanical system. Like I said, you're gonna have, the limits might look different. The B tension screw might look different. The functionality is all the same. It's about limiting the derailleur in either direction and then getting the cable tension set appropriately so that the chain shifts from gear to gear cleanly and smoothly. So now we're going to talk about electric drivetrains. We already went over kind of derailleur theory, how derailleurs work, checking your derailleur hanger, things like that. So we're just going to focus on the specifics of adjustment of electric systems. The first one we're looking at here is Shimano's Di2. This is the 12-speed stuff, which is kind of partially wireless. The front and rear derailleurs have a wire that runs into a battery inside the seat tube, but then the battery has a wireless transmitter that connects up to the shifters to make the shifts. The nice thing about electronic systems is once they're adjusted, they should never really go out of adjustment, just because there's no cable and housing to get fouled up by grit, et cetera, et cetera. So the only time the system will typically go out of adjustment is if the derailleur hanger is bent. So I'm going to go over adjusting these just so if your hanger is slightly bent out on a ride and you just want to try to make the shifting a little bit better, you can do that just until you get home, adjust your derailleur hanger and align your derailleur hanger. So there are two ways to do this with the 12-speed system. You can either connect to your rear derailleur and do it via Bluetooth. You can actually make the derailleur adjust via your phone through the Shimano eTube app. We're going to show you the just kind of mechanical way to do it here on the bike. So what you're going to do is you're going to find a little button down here, and you're going to press and hold that, and there's a little LED on top of the derailleur body here, and you're going to press and hold it. It's going to turn blue, and then it's going to turn yellow. When it turns yellow, you want to release. And when it turns yellow, you're in adjustment mode. So instead of each button press moving the shifter, or moving the derailleur an entire cog, it's going to micro adjust, and I believe it micro adjusts like a tenth of a millimeter for each button push. So if you have an issue where you're riding, and this is pretty well adjusted right now, we're going to take it out of adjustment and bring it back. Yeah, so you hear those noises there. Bring my mic close to it. So that's not normal. So what we're going to do, all you're going to do is get it into this adjustment mode, and you're just going to push a button. If the noise gets better, you know you're going in the right direction. If the noise gets worse, you know you're going in the wrong direction. So we'll push that button. Here it's becoming a little bit less noisy. I'm going to keep pushing. And here that noise is all gone. So once we're done with that, let's push and hold that button. The light's going to go blue, and then it's going to turn off. When the light turns off, release the button. And you can see you've got a nice, smooth, shifting rear derailleur. So the setup of this is exactly the same as a mechanical one. It has the two mechanical limit screws. It has a mechanical B-gap screw. So that setup is exactly the same. So if you have any questions about that, take a look earlier in the vid, and you'll get answers for that one. Now we've got our other kind of main electronic shifting system. Before I forget, there is also Campagnolo EPS, but it's a relatively uncommon system. And it's also, in terms of setup, it's almost identical to Shimano Di2. So if there's enough people asking for it, we'll do a video on that one. But for now, we're doing the more common electronic shifting systems. So this one is the new SRAM axis transmission. The differences between some older electronic mountain bike drivetrains and this one is there's no derailleur hanger, like we talked about. So this one, the derailleur is basically, it sandwiches the drop out of the frame. So it's a much stronger, much stiffer design. So in theory, you're never going to bend your derailleur, or you're never going to bend your derailleur hanger. In practice, people are still bending these, but it's much, much less common. But the good thing is, if you do bend the cage or the body or whatever, SRAM does actually sell the parts of the derailleur individually. So if you bend one piece, you don't have to replace the whole derailleur, which is kind of nice. The interesting thing about the way this is set up, it also doesn't have B tension. It does have B tension, but it relies on the clamping force of the derailleur body on the dropout to achieve that B tension. So we're not going to do like a full setup video on this stuff, because frankly, SRAM has a perfect video of how to do it that they've posted. And you could even do it on the SRAM Access app on your phone. It'll tell you how long your chain needs to be, how long you need to set up the bead tension. So we're just gonna go over kind of some quick symptoms of what you would see and how to fix them. So we'll just go ahead and pedal through. This one is adjusted pretty darn well. If you have minor issues where for whatever reason the chain isn't lining up properly, you still do have a button on your shifter that you can press and hold to do micro adjustments of the rear derailleur. So it's kind of like the Di2 system in that you need to get it into a setup mode. But to do this one, you press and hold the action button on the shifter. I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but it's just a little button right here. Press and hold that, and then you press one of the shifter toggles, and it's gonna move that shifter, or it's gonna move that derailleur about 1/10 of a millimeter. Fine tune that, that spacing on the cock. The other thing to note with this system is the transmission stuff does not have limit screws. So the way that it's designed is that once it's set up, it learns where the upper and lower limits are on the derailleur, and you don't need to worry about limit screws, which is a nice little feature. The only other thing to consider is if you encounter that rumbling noise when you're shifting up, that's typically gonna mean that you didn't quite set your bead tension right when you were initially setting up your rear derailleur, or for whatever reason, this pinch bolt has loosened and that B-gap has slipped. You're just gonna wanna reset it up according to the SRAM official guide, and that'll get you up and running again. Well, thanks for watching. Hope you learned a little something about rear derailleurs and you're more confident in tackling them the next time you need to adjust one. If you have any questions about these, or if you're looking to pick up any parts or tools to work on this stuff, feel free to reach out to our gearheads via chat, call, or email. Keep in mind, this is kind of a new series for us, so we're always looking for new topics to talk about, specifically with bike maintenance. So if there's anything you want us to cover, please drop a comment down below. We'd also love if you like and subscribe to our channel so we can keep doing videos like this. But thanks a lot, and we'll see you on the next one.